I suppose more kind of to say to them, thank you. That's a hard thing, because you don't want to say thank you when they're around, do you? Particularly. And it's a very difficult thing to do. But yeah, I mean, if you were to magic them up, I'd say, just thank you very much.
My guest in this episode was born in 1960 in Nottingham. Studying politics and sociology at Keele University at the start of the 80s, he worked for children's ITV and in radio and got a job as a continuity announcer for Central ITV and C4, where he stayed for 24 years. He married his wife, Sue, in 1999 and has 2 late teenage sons, Jack and Max. Gary now runs a voiceover masterclass for students interested in pursuing work in the voiceover industry. In these sessions, he teaches his students the process of recording a voiceover, shares fundamental knowledge for success as a voiceover artist, and his students leave with 4 professional demos to jumpstart their career. In search for a local recording studio, he found my studio in 2017, and we've been running regular classes for his students ever since. When Gary's not working, he's out jogging or spending time with his family. Gary Terzza, welcome to Unlived Lives.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Who is your biggest fan?
My biggest fan? I don't know. Do you mean family-wise or anyone? I don't know. I'd like to think Sue, but I don't know whether that's necessarily true. And it's probably, maybe professionally, not necessarily. I don't know. I mean, I've had real fans, unbelievably, in the past.
Right.
I'm sure they haven't stayed with me as my as my career has descended. I don't know. I'm not sure I've got any fans, really. I'm not sure I've got a fan. I could say myself, but that would be a totally narcissistic thing. Well, but it's not. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. And I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's you must have had... Did you have people contact you or want to get in touch with you during your continuity career?
Yes. I mean, you would... Because you were on TV, you would have people who would latch on to you, and you would have various levels of fans. So you'd have people who are vaguely interested in you or whatever. And then people who just say, can you send a signed photo because you're on screen, so you'd send a signed photo. And then others would be a bit more persistent. So you get a kind of, a dedicated fan. And then you get those who perhaps were a little too dedicated, who were not very many in my case, but for whatever reason just kind of really zoned in on you, and they would be obsessed almost. Not that I had many, I had a couple of those. But I think they're quite ephemeral, and they soon move on to the next person.
Right. So. How did you go about sort of processing / mediating that situation?
I think it's just being polite and firm and saying, no, I am actually married. And saying, I think it's very difficult because you don't want to upset them, and, they're doing it in all good faith. So I think I just found I had to just basically say, well, this is me. on the screen, and not that I'm not a real person, but I'm not it's difficult to say I'm not available as a real person for you.
Sure.
I think it's just keeping it, from memory, it's just keeping it fairly basic, fairly, I suppose, at arm's length, really.
Right.
So just being pleasant. In those days, it was letters, so you could have time to respond. It's probably much harder, I think, for people these days because of email and Twitter and so on. But in those days, you could have a good think about it. So I just write back saying, thanks very much. Here's another signed photo.
Really appreciate the support.
Yeah.
Sort of
You just have to. But I didn't have a huge number because I was only on screen really in the 80s.
Right.
And most of that was local. So most of that was in the Midlands, as opposed to being sort of fully networked until I did the children's ITV stuff. And then I was a co-presenter with a presenter called Debbie. And she used to get far more fan mail than I did. So, and that was kind of, I think there was a running gag on air and things like that. So that wasn't too bad. And we did have a production team who'd kind of handle those sorts of things for you. But,
sure.
But yeah, so I mean, it was quite nice. I mean, it was quite nice when people
noticed,
recognise. I suppose it's one of those things, isn't it? That if someone spots you in Sainsbury's or whatever and says, "Oh, I recognise you from TV."
Yeah.
Often, I mean, in my case, because I was a very minor celebrity in the Midlands, they would say, "Oh, I recognise you, but I don't know who you are." And that would be the usual thing.
Yeah.
That kind of the face was familiar, but they couldn't quite pin it down.
Yeah.
So, one of those things. But it was an interesting experience.
It feels like
really.
it's sort of almost like you dipped your toe into the world of fame.
Yeah, that would be a good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
And
definitely. Sort of, how do you feel about fame based on that?
I don't think I'd want it, really.
Right.
Not real fame. No, I'm sure. I've read somewhere, someone said, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, I wouldn't wish it on my own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, But like you say, I sort of probably had the best of both worlds, that I could be fairly anonymous, but also occasionally get picked up, get recognised. So I don't think I'd want it. I wouldn't want the whole shebang. I think that would be just too much to cope with.
On the assumption you had a vivid imagination as a child, I can't imagine you dreamt of being a continuity announcer. So I'm assuming there, and feel free to shut me down, but if we were to ask the childhood version of you, what do you want to do? What would you say?
How old am I?
Well, up to you.
I think I went through various phases of wanting to do things. Like, for a while, I wanted to be a magician. So I had one trick, which was a thimble. I used to have a thimble on my finger, and then I'm not going to reveal the background to that and the secret of it, but I'd take the thimble off, blow my hand, and then it would disappear and then come back. And I thought this was a brilliant trick, and I remember doing it when I was in Cub Scouts, and they used to do a gang show, the gang show, which is like the sort of variety show. And I went to do a local one in Nottingham, and really sort of, I've got this amazing trick, and my turn was getting up on stage and doing this. And I did it, and another Cub Scout shouted out, "I know how you've done that."
Oh, no.
And I thought, oh, no. And I was completely deflated, and that was it. Because at one point, I remember saying to my dad, "Oh, please, can you pay for me to join the Magic Circle?"
Oh, wow.
With my one trick. And he was saying, "Well, I think you need some more tricks up your sleeve before you do anything else."
How old were you at this point?
I was probably about 10, 11, something like that. And so I never became a magician. I used to like the magicians of the time.
Was that what inspired you? Was that who inspired you?
Yeah, I think so. Just watching TV and seeing these guys. I think magic goes, and illusionists go through phases, don't they? So they were sort of back in with, more recently with people like David Blaine.
Right, sure. In and out of fashion.
Yeah. But at the time, it was people like David Nixon, who was quite a well-known one. And
boys, thank you. It's the dogs going off.
Yes, and so I was quite inspired by what he was doing, so I suppose that's kind of was enough for me to want to go and do
to pursue it. Yeah,
yeah.
And then after that, you alluded to magician, and then.
After that, probably I wanted to be a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Well, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I was rubbish at science, which is a bad start. And I remember saying to my friend's mum, she would say, "Oh, what do you want to be?" I was about 11, 12 then. I said, "I want to be a doctor." So she would always say, "How are you getting on with your medical studies?" And I'd say, "I'm terrible at maths, I'm terrible at chemistry, I'm not doing very well at physics, I'm okay at biology, but that's about it." And then I took my options, and I remember majoring in sciences, which was a complete and utter mistake because I was rubbish at them. And I think I only realised sort of several years later that actually what I wanted was to be maybe an actor playing a doctor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in fact, I thought about this the other day, and I thought, yeah, that's what I wanted to be, really. I didn't really want to be a doctor. I wanted to be on screen doing, at the time, there were programs like Emergency Ward 10, General Hospital.
Right.
These were shows that I must have seen. And I remember thinking, that's what I want to do. But actually, I don't think I did want to do it.
No.
Enter the medical profession. So, of course, I never even got close, basically, because I flunked all my O-levels in science. So that was not a good start.
So did you made decisions about your exams and obviously based on that dream?
In those days, and it probably is still the same to some extent, but in those days, at 14, you were told you had to choose your options. So your options were usually go for arts or social sciences or the sciences. And I stupidly went for the sciences. And I mean, you still did. You had to still do English and history and so on, and a language. But I ended up sort of chemistry, maths, physics. And I probably could have got away with just doing one of those or two of them, whatever the requirement was at the time. But I ended up sort of with, going down the science route at O level, so GCSE standard. And it was definitely not for me. And I wish I'd sort of taken more artsy things, that would have been better. Well, I suppose if drama, I'm not sure drama was available at the school, but maybe drama or something like that
to
might
pursue
have
the acting.
Yeah, possibly. So it's just one of those things that I remember teachers saying, "Oh, you must, whatever you choose." I remember them saying this, "Whatever you choose at 14 will determine the rest of your life."
That's not changed.
Which is a bit of a ridiculous thing, isn't it? Yeah, they still say that sort of thing. But and that was, just completely wrong to say to a 14-year-old.
It strikes fear into you, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. They're saying you make this choice now, and that's it. It will determine
the rest of your life.
The rest of your life, and actually, it doesn't at all.
Yeah.
You can go off and do something else. You might end up doing your sciences or your drama or whatever at a later date. Who cares?
And become an infinitely more interesting person in the process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. Wow. Describe an important teacher in your life outside of school.
Outside of school, but a teacher. Well, I think it would be someone called Mrs. Thacker, not Mrs. Thatcher, the Prime Minister, but Mrs. Thacker, who worked in a newsagent's, and I got a job in a newsagent's in my late teens. And she taught me how to do maths, basically, arithmetic. She didn't know she was teaching me. It was kind of, she would have done it, sort of just getting me to add up prices in the newsagents, and I was on the sweet counter to begin with. So I noticed when I started, because my arithmetic was so bad, and I never learnt my times tables properly,
Counting out sweets.
Yeah, well, not counting out sweets so much, but in those days you didn't have a till that would add up,
sure,
or tell you how much change you had to do. So it all had to be in your head, or you could write it down
on your fingers. Yeah,
yeah. So I would be under the counter. People would come over and say, I want 20 No. 6 cigarettes, I want a Sun newspaper, and a Sporting Life magazine, and some bonbons. 2 ounces of bonbons, please. How much is that? And I think,
oh, Christ.
That's a big order. But these people would come in and they would know what the price was because they'd always order the same things. So they come in and go, that's £4.27. And I go, thank you, that's £4.27. But I'd be like this. And I remember seeing Mrs. Thacker looking over at me once, but she never said anything. She'd just go, oh, well, just add that up. And after a while, looking at her do it, and she had no real education, she was much older and so on, and they would have had no education in those days, not like we were having in the 70s. And I remember just seeing her in action, and she'd go, right, that's £2.30 plus £1.40, and she'd be able to come up with, absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
With the correct amount and give the correct change.
Wow.
Just in her head. I thought, that's absolutely amazing. So I just kind of, just through dint of doing it lots and lots of times, ended up being quite good at it. Well, I was quite good towards the end. After a few months, I knew that, a packet of fags cost that much, and cigars were that price, and when you added that to the newspaper, you got this price, and this was the change you would give.
Has that helped you since?
No. Well, it sort of
Thank
did
you,
for
Mrs.
a while.
Thacker.
I've lost the ability, I think, now.
Right.
I mean, it was definitely, I say that, but maybe it helps. Maybe it helps a little bit. It probably does.
Yeah.
It probably does.
Yeah.
And you don't need, we've got calculators. I mean, we did have calculators then, but they were rarer. So I mean, it was certainly something that I thought, I've learned that, and all my time at school, I never learned how to add up at all, or to give change, but I do now. So I realise that sometimes it's in the real world that you actually discover where you how to do things, and how to do things properly.
It's like they try and teach you languages in school.
Yeah.
And then actually you spend a year in the country and you sort of pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to.
Yes, yeah.
I guess, there's similarities there.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that you regret losing touch with?
I suppose when you get older, you do lose touch with people, don't you? I'm not sure, really. I mean, I've tried to stay in contact with a lot of my university friends. I'm probably, because my university friends sort of, although we were all about the same age, they were slightly younger in many cases, because we all kind of graduated roughly at the same time and we kept in contact, that was great. But they went off and got married and had children much earlier than I did. Right. So I was a late developer, which has always been the case in my life, really. I've been a late developer. So I came to that party at a much, much later date. So some of those are now grandparents. And I think, I'm just starting out.
Sure.
Okay, my boys are growing up, but, I'm just starting out as a parent, let alone a grandparent.
How did that feel for you at the time?
I think, well, it's sort of ongoing because they're, popping out the grandchildren as we speak. Yeah. And I think it felt, I just thought, oh, they're way, way ahead of me, and I'm just slightly behind. And also, I think it just underscores the fact that I went off and did something different. So I didn't go into, they went into more professional
real jobs.
Yeah. And they weren't, some of them went to be lawyers or teachers, just those kinds of jobs are very different to mine, really.
Yeah.
Although I think one or two of them might think, oh, I would love to have done that.
Sure.
And maybe vice versa. Maybe I think I should have gone off and
been an actor.
Or been a lawyer.
Yeah.
Or an accountant or whatever. So I think in some ways, yes, that means you're slightly on the periphery compared to just being there, because I wasn't there, when they all went on holiday together, because they had their children together, so they were all playing. So I was sort of slightly on the outside. And
couldn't really join in with that.
Still enjoying the life of North London or whatever. And
so you put it entirely down to your job?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Not entirely. I think it would have been me anyway, that I would have taken my time, because I'm a late developer.
Sure.
Taken my time to get round to. I mean, it does take time to meet the right person and settle down.
And you don't get a choice in that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky. I bought a house quite early on, so I was doing that. But even they had all bought their houses by the time I bought mine.
Right.
So and I think that pushes you sort of slightly into the outer orbit a little bit.
Yeah, and so are you still in touch with university friends?
Yeah, I mean, we are, yes. Yeah, maybe because of the lockdown and everything, not as much, interestingly. Sure. But I've still got those people, and I've got a very good long-term friend, school friend, basically. And we're still, in contact, even though we haven't seen each other for a long time for various reasons. But we're still in contact, and so that's been going on since I was 11. So it's 50 years. It'll be 50 years this September.
So
we'll have to have a celebration.
Obviously, after university, sounds like you quite quickly got your job in sort of TV and radio.
Yeah, I was really
lucky. How
lucky.
did that happen?
Well, I mean, that for me was just incredible, and also for people around me at the time, because there was a big recession on in 1982, and most of the people in my class at university, fellow graduates, were struggling to find any work. And I remember even before I'd graduated, I managed to get this amazing job as an trainee announcer on TV. And people were saying to me, oh, have you got a job? And I was saying, yeah. They went, wow, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to be on the telly. I'm going to be on TV. I just, what? So for me, it was amazing. But I think for people around me, it was amazing as well. Kind of, my goodness, not only has he got a job, but he's got a job on TV,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was incredible. And I think, I had that. I was really lucky to have that break at that point of time, going straight from university straight into a job. So.
And say if that was one of your friends and not you, what do you think? Where would you have gone? What was your plan at that point?
I would have been really envious. I would have been very jealous, I think, because I think I wanted to do something, because I was doing some hospital radio at the time. So that was in Nottingham, but I was at Keele, which is where I was at university. But I used to go back in holiday time and do work for Mrs. Thacker in the newsagents and sweet shop. But I also used to go and do hospital radio as well. So I knew, in fact, I was aiming to try and get into radio if I could. But then this job came up in TV.
And it was close enough,
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, well, even better, wasn't it?
So,
It's kind of, I thought, well, I want to be in radio, but why don't I give this TV thing
So
a
how
go?
did the radio thing come about? Because you went from wanting to be an actor, doctor, to wanting to be on the radio.
I think I'd always liked listening to the radio. And me and my friend Colin, my best friend, who we've been friends 50 years now, we used to muck about with tapes and things. And in those days, it was proper tapes, kind of reel-to-reel tapes. And I had an old Philips reel-to-reel tape machine that my parents had bought me. It's from my Uncle Ron. They couldn't afford to buy them. These things were very expensive. And they bought off my Uncle Ron for my Christmas one year, about 71, 72. They bought this tape machine. And I discovered that if you put some tape on the erase head, you could multi-track. So I discovered this and I thought, that's amazing. I can do all these funny voices and silly things. And so I used to say this to my friend Colin and say, well, let's muck about with it. So we did. So we started off impersonating teachers and doing silly things like that and doing silly sketches, which we did. And that's kind of how it sort of developed, really. So although that wasn't radio directly, I was involved in sound recording to an extent. So that, but I used to love listening to the radio as well. And there wasn't much of it when I was growing up. There was sort of the BBC, and then commercial radio came along, and I just loved listening to it. So, and I thought, I'd quite like to be a radio DJ, I think, radio presenter. And so I ended up doing that, but much later, but professionally anyway. I mean, I did it sort of voluntarily as a student on hospital radio, and then went off to sort of late 80s. I managed to, well, in fact, early 80s, I ended up on the Birmingham radio station, BRMB, and then I did some stuff for Radio Trent, which was my local station in Nottingham and Derby. Did that sort of at the end of the 80s. So I did end up doing some proper radio that I was getting paid for. But I sort of went a very circuitous route to get to it.
Okay. And on that, but sort of going back to, if one of your friends had got that job instead of you, and you'd feel envious, who are you envious of now?
I'm not sure I am now, but I remember. I don't think I've got a lot of envy. I don't think, I want to do that now, because I feel I've sort of dabbled in things, and that's kind of satisfied my hunger, if you like, or scratched that itch. So I don't think I would be. But I do remember when I was at school, I had another friend called Mark, and he ended up on a TV show, like a kids' TV show, as a guest. Right. It was a program, I think it was called Search. And I remember he got that, and I was really pleased for him. But I remember thinking, that's what I want to do. So I knew in the back of my mind, I wanted to be on TV or radio. But he got on kind of on the BBC, you know. And also there was lots of, like in the school magazine, he was featured, we have a star in our midst and all that. And I did start to get a bit envious then. And I thought, I'd like to do that. So,
do you feel like you've lived or are living an ordinary or extraordinary life?
I think I've done some extraordinary things rather than extraordinary. It's not particularly extraordinary, but I've done some things that lots of people will never get to do. And for me, that's great. So I would say I've had extraordinary moments wrapped up in an ordinary, fairly sort of ordinary life, I think. It depends on your definition of ordinary, doesn't it? Is it usual? I don't know really, but it's I've done some good things, that I've enjoyed doing that I think are a bit different, and it's quite nice when people say, "What do you do?" and you say, "Well, I've been on the telly or whatever," and it's one of those things that you think, "Oh, well, it's quite nice to say that, really, rather than I'm an accountant or I'm a lawyer or whatever."
It's unusual.
Yeah, it's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, that's good. And I think for me, that's been very good, because I was brought up on, in a very good way by my parents. But, people didn't do that. I mean, people didn't go to university. I was born and bred on a council estate, and people didn't go to university, And I was certainly, I think, possibly one of the first in my family to do that. In those days, people didn't go to university. I mean, it's completely different now, but in those days, you just didn't.
Wow.
So that in itself was kind of an achievement, So I felt from doing absolutely, or being rubbish at everything, especially sciences, but sports, utter rubbish, and then doing something, I thought, oh, well, I can do something, I'm not totally useless. So in that way, it's been so far, and hopefully I'll carry on a bit, a good, extraordinary life for me, but maybe in years to come, I'll think, no, that was pretty pretty darn ordinary. I don't think so, though.
But it's about comparison, that question.
Yes.
Perhaps, it's, as you said, how do you define ordinary? We've touched on this before in one of our sessions. I've mentioned it before, Mr. Robert Frost. Do you think there is any truth in the lines, they fuck you up, your mum and dad? They may not mean to, but they do. As a parent, and also a son. I think they inadvertently may do. Yes, but I think it's a double-edged sword, and I think sometimes they, hopefully in most cases, you give your children all the right things and give them the fertile soil to grow. But there probably is some truth in that, and you're not doing it deliberately. And I noticed that with my sons. I think I could have done things perhaps a different way. I don't know what things, but I'm sure they'll tell me. Would you have gone too far that way, or
perhaps,
it was,
perhaps. Yeah, I remember my mum once saying that she was quite old when she told me this, but she said, "Oh, I think I was a bit too strict." Right. So it was interesting that she said that. I don't remember her being particularly too strict, but there may have been occasions when she was. But
did you agree?
Yeah, I probably did at the time. I don't know. I think it's so difficult to be a parent. It is so difficult. And it's an old cliche, isn't it? But it is, because there's no manual with it. You only know from your own experience, or maybe looking around at other people. But it is tough, yeah. And it's difficult to do. You hope you're just doing the right thing, and that's all you can do. But I think the other thing is, as a parent, don't beat yourself up, and hopefully as a kid, don't beat yourself up about your parents, unless they were really horrible to you. Sure, but I think most parents are trying to do the very, very best. And you would have made mistakes, and things like that.
Yeah. So. And do you think there's a sort of a resolution for that? If there's been mistakes, there have been misunderstandings or misinterpretations, like how can that be resolved?
I don't know. I think it depends on the parents and the child, doesn't it, or the children? And you can't. I don't think you can have a prescriptive, this is what you must do.
Sure.
And I think, you can dive too deeply into it. And sometimes you're just trying to survive, so just trying to pay the mortgage, or just trying to, get them off to school or whatever. So I don't think. Well, maybe, like I say, maybe the boys will come back to me in years to come and say, you should have done this, you should have done that.
I hate you for this.
But then, of course, it's too late. It'll be too late for me. But if they can learn from that, then you can. But obviously the poem says, really, at the end of the day, you're repeating the mistakes. You're repeating the same mistakes, aren't you? Which I'm sure happens. Perhaps just understanding that is a good starter, isn't it? Just that you're going to make mistakes. Yeah. You just hope that they're not internalized too much, or they don't throw the child off course, or have some scarring or profound effect on them. So if you can do that, then hopefully as a parent, you're doing quite well, and you've done your bit. But yeah, difficult one, really. Super difficult. And on that sort of tangent, what are the happiest memories of your parents? I think probably holidays, going away on holiday with them. They always made sure that we had a holiday, even if it was just on the East Coast, the bitterly cold English East Coast, and swimming in the North Sea.
Wow.
Which is not, well, I say swimming in it, sort of paddling in it probably. So I have, I think, and just generally, you get them, sadly my parents are no longer around, and you do think, it'd be nice to chat to them again, but that's not possible. So...
do you feel like you didn't chat to them enough when they were around? Or?
Well, they were part of a generation that you didn't talk about, your emotions too much. Not too much. And that was par for the course, wasn't it? People who'd, in terms of my mum and dad, my dad had fought in the war, and they often didn't want to talk about that. Although sometimes they then talked about it too much. So I remember my dad say, if he got together with his brother, they just talk about the war. And we go as kids, stop talking about the war, it's really boring. Yeah. But now I think, actually, I'd really like to know more, especially, so my sons will talk about it, or they'll talk about it from a historical perspective. And I'll say, well, actually, your granddad was in the war, he was in the RAF, he was in the desert. And they must have endured, it must have been horrific if you think about it. These were young guys, 19, 20, going off to war and being forced to go off as well, being conscripted to go off. So perhaps if I'd spoken a bit more about it. But I think there perhaps was a shutter that came down that they didn't want to talk about some things, but some funny things they would talk about. And it obviously had a profound effect on that generation. And
what would you like to talk about? If you could, what would you talk to them about now?
I'd talk about, maybe get my boys involved and say, well, let's talk about what you did. What was it really like being out there?
Yeah.
What was it like being a teenager or someone in their 20s? Best years of your life, aren't they, really?
Sure.
And whereas I had such a privileged upbringing, in the sense that I didn't have to go off to war. I went to university,
Sure.
But at the time I was doing that, and it's only kind of latterly I've thought about this, that, my dad would have been in the war. He would have had no opportunity to go and do further education or whatever.
Just wasn't a choice.
It just wasn't on the table. So I suppose I'd like to, more kind of to say to them, thank you. That's a hard thing, because you don't want to say thank you when they're around, do you? Particularly. And it's a very difficult thing to do. But yeah, if you were to magic them up, I'd say, just thank you very much, really. And we might have had disagreements or whatever. But, I was fortunate that they were really supportive, even though they often didn't understand what was going on. So they'd be supportive of me going into TV and radio and pursuing that. So they never said, you've been to university, you should go off and train to be a civil servant or an accountant or whatever. They never said any of that.
Right.
And me and Sue have both tried to do that with our boys and say, it doesn't matter. You don't have to go off down a certain route.
These exams aren't going to rule the rest of your life.
And my parents were really good like that. Right. They were just sort of, whatever you want to do, we'll support you.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Although they often didn't understand it. So I'd say, I don't know, I'm doing continuity, whatever, on TV. And I think they were so overwhelmed by it because they hadn't been brought up in that sort of environment. And it was completely unnatural or unusual. But they were very proud of it, in their own way. So for them, it was, it was a big thing. So I think in terms of what I'd say is just thanks a lot for supporting me. You probably didn't realise you were supporting me because you didn't seem you were overtly doing anything, but you were. You gave me that stable background to be able to go off and do it.
Is there anything your boys do that in turn you don't understand now?
Yeah, lots of things, like lots of. I suppose game playing.
Right.
It's your generation and younger, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
And I just don't get it. I've tried, and they've tried to get me to play FIFA, and I just, I've got terrible thumbs, or I'm not quick enough. So I just can't get my head around the gameplay. I accept that, yes, I'm sure it's really addictive and it's great fun, and I really appreciate the graphics. And I can see that graphics are getting better, just watching them. That the sets are getting better and the humans are looking more human. So I do appreciate that, and I do like some of the decor on Grand Theft Auto,
Quite.
which is very nice.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't like the violence. And I said to them, why don't they do a game about diplomacy? Well, there's no violence. You don't have to shoot anyone. And I suppose some of the things I could hear my parents saying, not that we play games, but, sort of, there's too much violence on TV or whatever. And they're kind of shooting and there's blood everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think, surely you don't have to do that. There's too much real violence.
Was there ever a moment that you reminded yourself of your mother or father?
Yeah, sort of. Watching stuff on TV. I mean, I can't remember any specific programs, but there must have been stuff I liked that they thought, and I remember thinking, I shouldn't be watching this because they don't like it.
Right.
They don't understand it. Probably something like Monty Python, for example, which was, my mum and dad had been. Yeah, well, it was just stupid to them, but that was the point, that it was stupid and so silly. It was very funny. That it's just a generational thing, isn't it, really? Yeah, so, gameplay, a real big thing. I ought to try and learn to play a proper video game and be good at it.
I have to ask them. I mean, I have to say, it would be wonderful to be able to play a game with my dad.
Would it?
I mean, that would be a really
does
cool
your dad
thing.
play?
No chance.
Have you ever tried to teach him?
No chance. Absolutely no chance. But
and is that because your dad is not of that generation? He's just missed it.
Entirely missed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He just, I think, in a similar way to you, I just don't think he gets it. My brother is in video games. He's an environment artist, and there's sort of like, what's that again? What do you actually do? So yeah.
The thing is, and we've discussed this, that I get a lot of people contacting me saying, I want to be a voice actor in video games.
Yeah.
And I think, why? Why do you want to do? Why not do a butter commercial or a shampoo commercial? It's much more exciting.
The same process.
Well, it is. I always think, but they're so passionate about it, and I suppose I don't understand, or I try to understand the reason for the passion. But that's difficult. It must just be a generational thing. Although I used to love playing Space Invaders at the arcade, so I did enjoy that.
What age were you when that came out?
I might have been sort of early 20s.
Okay.
So prime time, had I been younger, or had I been around, 20s in whatever dates the video games really took off, I probably would have got hooked on it. I'm sure I would. Because, I love TV and radio, which for us was the thing at the time.
Yeah.
But the really ironic thing is that my youngest son, who's 18, is really into vinyl. And he loves playing, and I've got all these vinyl albums, of course. He's really into playing vinyl. And I'm saying, don't use that, use Spotify.
Wow.
It's so much easier. So I'm listening to Spotify on my Bluetooth headphones when I go jogging. And he's putting the needle onto the record, and all those crackles and pops coming through.
But it's an appreciation for the sort of, it feels so much more, because I've got a few vinyl as well, and I've got my mum's old player and all the rest of it, and there is something about holding it, and it's an appreciation that you have to listen to the whole record, otherwise you have to spend ages trying to find the track, Well,
that's a really interesting thing, because my other son couldn't understand where the beginning of the record was. And I was saying, well, it's just there. It's right at the start, And he said, well, why is there that gap there? And I said, well, that's before the story actually begins.
The track, yeah.
And he couldn't understand. And they, it's quite hard, I think, to explain what it means to flip the LP over and play the other side. And that's been a big kind of explaining moment. But I'm amazed at how particularly Max has really got into vinyl. And I think he likes the artwork as well. And that's the big thing. And like you were saying,
they're just small little squares now. You barely see them.
Absolutely. And so the artwork doesn't matter too much, I suppose. Certainly with CDs, I thought they never mattered particularly, because it was so small compared to a 12-inch album. And the great thing about albums is they're absolutely perfect for pieces of art, aren't they? You could hang them on your wall.
Indeed,
really.
Yeah, and they all fit together, and you can do a big collage or whatever.
And it's the physicality, isn't it? It's the physicality of owning that piece of real estate music, if you like.
What are the best features of middle age?
I'm glad you said middle age rather than the start of old age. I think, I didn't like being 50. I must admit, that was the only, when I got to 30, I thought it was great. When I got to 40, it was okay. When I got to 50, I didn't like it. When I got to 60, I was okay. But 50, I felt old. Suddenly 50 sounded like an old number.
Right.
And I felt middle age at that point. And also, I lost my mum and my father-in-law at that time. So it was a big sort of watershed in some ways. I think as you get older, for me anyway, beyond that age, so when you get to 60, you think, well, that's it. Not that's it, the end. But now you can sort of relax a little bit. You have less to prove, I suppose. That's the big thing, isn't it? So I don't feel I have to prove anything, or some of my old university friends were still saying in my 40s and 50s maybe, when are you going to get a proper job? When are you going to use your degree to do a different career, have a different career? And I was thinking, well, this is my career. It's what I do and what I've done, and I've done it now. So I think it's that sense of I don't have to go out and prove it, probably to myself. I don't have to prove anything. And anything is a bonus, so anything that comes along. So, yeah, I'm probably, I've always been fairly laid back and mellow anyway, but I think I probably am even more so internally. So I don't think, I've got to go and do this and go and do that. I know some people think the reverse, that they've got to go and climb up Everest or whatever, or go and walk the Pennine Way, or go windsurfing or something.
Something fantastic.
Yeah, and I don't have any of that, but I never have. I've never been very adventurous at all. I'm really boring in that sense. So I've never been adventurous, and I still don't want to do any of those things. Thank you. Maybe ask me at 70 and I might go,
finally.
Yes.
I'm going to do Everest now.
I've got to go scuba diving.
When do you feel shy?
I suppose in big groups. I'm not a big group person, and that's taken me a long time to discover. And me and Sue have talked about this, and I think there are people who are very good in groups, but I tend to get overwhelmed, I think, by them, and also I can only seem to spend a certain amount of time with them. And again, it's something I've only realised in later life and accepted myself, that if I see a whole load of people, it's lovely to see them, and I have a really good time, and then I've had enough. Not that I'm being rude and I'm going to walk off, and I wouldn't, but I remember going, some friends all got together a few years ago, and it was great, really had a good time, and then we all stayed over in this cottage, and then the next day they wanted me to go off and do something else. They were all going off. I can't remember, to see someone else. Yeah. And I thought, no, I just want to go home. I just want to go. I've actually reached my limit now. That's it. My brain's overwhelmed. I can't have any more bonhomie. I've got to go. And I did. And some of them were a bit, you're sort of going, well, yeah, I've got to get back, and so on. Yeah. And I think it's accepting that to some extent.
How do you think society views that? We're sort of touching on extroversion and introversion, aren't we?
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, being quiet was a virtue. So particularly if you were in a noisy class. So a lot of the teachers used to say to my parents at parents' evening, we love Gary, he's so well behaved and he's quiet.
Right.
And that was a big tick. Now, the reverse would be true. Yeah. And they would say, he's so quiet. What's the matter with him? And I think that's a bad thing, because I think it's okay to be quiet. And I think Stephen King said something like, the quietest people have the loudest minds. I know it's really stuck with me, that. And it's probably very true. Just because you're quiet and you're not saying anything doesn't mean anything.
Nothing's happening.
No, and my mum was very quiet. My mum would, be with family and friends, and she would hardly say anything. And I used to think, oh God, she's had a terrible time. Yeah. And afterwards she'd go, it's really enjoyable, wasn't it? So she would have enjoyed it in her own way. So I enjoy company. I'm a sort of gregarious loner, I think would be so I'm quite sort of gregarious and friendly with people.
For a short amount of time?
For a fairly short amount of time, yeah. And then after that, I mean, it depends how much alcohol is flowing. I suppose if the alcohol is flowing, maybe it'll extend that time. But even then, by the end of it.
The morning after, that's it.
That's it. Yeah. It's time to go home.
Yeah.
And, just be on my own or something.
So what was the process of discovering that? You said you discovered that quite recently.
Yes, I mean it's taken me 60 years to realise, or to accept it. I think to accept it, that, and I think you don't realise you're being quiet or shy until people tell you, because you may be sort of engaged in your own way. So you may be really listening to what's going on in the room if there are a lot of people there. And perhaps to other people, in some groups, maybe I don't come across as shy, And there's a misunderstanding that if you are shy or quiet or whatever, being on TV or radio would be the last thing you want to do.
Sure.
But I think it's the reverse. Because
you're alone in a room.
You're alone in absolutely. You're alone in a room, and you're in control.
Yeah. And
there's no one else there. You hope there is someone there, but it doesn't matter because you've got some sort of control over it. So it's a fascinating subject, actually. But yeah, it's taken me a long time to accept it. I think I've always known. I've always been a bit quieter. But then sometimes I quite like loud people. So sometimes I get on, some of my friends are quite loud and so on.
Complimentary, perhaps, yeah.
And they'll bring me up to a certain level.
Right.
So I'll be more engaged. But then other times I just think, I'd just sort of probably close down rather than open up.
If it's too much.
If it's too much, yeah. If the group's too big.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it depends. I think it depends on the setting. The setting and the context are really important, aren't they? But I think if you were to say, there's a whole load of people coming here. I mean, I would, like I say, I'd be gregarious and I'd chat to people and so on. And then after a while, I'd probably just sit in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. yeah.
With my beer.
Yeah, quite, and just have a nice, quiet rest of your evening. Yeah. Do you think other people regard you as a good listener?
I don't know. I'm not sure. A good listener. I try to be a good listener. Sue always accuses me of not listening enough. So, and there may be some truth in that. But I try to be a good listener. Yeah, I mean, particularly with close friends. I tried. Yeah, I try to listen as much as possible and take that on. So, yeah, but maybe they've got a different.
What do you think the attributes of a good listener are?
Listening. I think it's not interrupting and not coming back with your own equivalent story.
Right.
I think that might be one of them, one of the attributes. So that if someone's saying to you, right, this has happened to me, or I've got a health issue, whatever, you don't say, well, it's a funny thing that happened to me as well, but I was all right, or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you need to get that sorted. It happened to me. And I think trying to hold back on the equivalent stories, really, until the appropriate moment and then come in. Because sometimes if someone's saying something that strikes a chord with you, you want to go back and
share it.
Yeah, and you want to have a riposte with the conversation, don't you?
Yeah.
But I think that probably is kind of anti-listening. So I think it's better to just sort of sit back and take it on board and then ask questions at the appropriate moments. And sometimes just being a listening post, actually being someone to listen, to play that role of the listener, because sometimes all people want to do is get something off their chest, don't they? So, and if you're that person, then fine. So I think probably that is a good listener, someone who will do that and then not judge you, of course. That's the other thing.
Perhaps also there's another attribute might be the cultivation of helping somebody to find the right words to say what they're trying to say, asking a right question. That's partly what this is about. Yeah.
And without being too prescriptive of this is what you should do.
Indeed.
Unless they say, what do you think I should do?
Yeah.
So you can offer advice at appropriate points. I'm not sure I do all of this, but this is this is the ideal listener that I hope to become one day. But I think if you are a good listener, you'll be there just taking on board what they're saying, and then hopefully nudging them in the right direction. If you know the answer, you may not know the answer. That doesn't matter, but you're there to kind of take it on board. Yeah,
take it on board. Yeah. It's really curious thing because I've been a terrible listener for a lot of my life.
Have you?
Like I've just done. I've brought the conversation onto myself and done a perfect example of exactly what you're saying. I'm going to talk about my experience.
I think that's fine.
But it is something that I've really actually realised quite recently myself, and actually now set myself the task actively to go, okay, I'm not going to say anything about myself unless I'm asked the question in a conversation, and just to actively do that, because I was so that person. Like who would just jump in with, I've got an experience in that area or whatever, just in order to relate or in order to feel, I don't know, part of, included or involved.
It's hard though, because you often want to give advice, don't you, or relate what's happened to you. If it's similar, you often want to do that, and there will be a point at which you can do that, but it has to be the appropriate moment, doesn't it? Which is hard, really. But no, I'm surprised, because I've always thought of you as being a good listener, actually.
Well, you've only known me for the past number of years. But, again, 4 years of therapy does do things and wake you up to certain things. So I definitely put my awareness of that and awareness of that question down to that experience entirely, because before that I had no awareness of that at all. I'd just be dying to not feel awkward.
Who told you you're not a good listener? Or was it self-realization?
Self-realization.
Right.
Through, I think, 3 years in to therapy, I'd sort of unpacked so much that I sort of started to put things together myself. And actually, they say, you can only teach so much. Sometimes you just got to let them go off and learn via their mistakes. And basically that's what happened. I'd unpacked so much of my past, my history, my brain, that I sort of went, I'm terrified of picking up the phone, because I think the person on the other end cares if I'm an idiot or not. Actually, they don't care at all. And that realization was transformative, because I was I'm not as afraid of, I haven't, it's never cured entirely, but I'm not as afraid of picking up the phone now, because that person doesn't care about me. Really, they're caring about what they want from me, or whatever the conversation's about. But that took me 4 years to figure out.
I'm going to be a bad listener now and say that happened to me. And it happened to me when I was very young. Actually, I remember when I was working for Mrs. Thacker at the newsagents, and she said, and I was about 17, 18, and she said, oh, can you just phone this company and say the order's not right? And can you ask them to sort out this order?
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah. And I thought, what? And my mum and dad didn't have a phone till I was at university. And in those days, it was very difficult to get a phone. I know it sounds incredible these days, but you had to go on a list and it was expensive and so on. And so they didn't get a telephone till I was at university. And this is probably just pre that time. And I thought, God, I've got to speak on the phone. So I had to dial this company, and this guy on the other end said, yep. And I just went, the order's wrong. And he went, what? I didn't understand a word of it, which of course was even worse. I thought, he said, just slow down and tell me what you want. And that was one of those awful moments, and then I slowed down.
You want the ground to swallow you up.
He didn't care about me particularly. He just wanted to know what I wanted.
Yeah.
And he wanted to sort the order out, presumably.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. That was terrifying for me to pick up that phone and dial someone I didn't know, just to talk to someone I didn't know. And yet now we do it all the time on the phone, don't we? Eventually I ended up talking on the phone an awful lot.
Sure. Because in radio, or because you had to?
Well, partly talking to listeners on there, but I just mean talking to friends and things on the phone.
So do you think that helped you get over that? Because that was, you were teens there, weren't you?
Yeah, I think it did. I think it was it wasn't the fear of the technology, it was the fear of that you highlighted, what will they think of me and how do I do it? How do I talk to someone on the phone, and this was a specific thing I had to do, sort out this order, how do I do? That's and that's why I just wanted to, sorry, I probably had the script in my head that I was going to say.
Run it over.
Mrs. Thacker said the order's wrong and it's got to be number 4762, or whatever it was. So then I just blurted it out, and,
as fast as possible.
Thanks very much, bye-bye.
Who has offered you the most useful career advice?
Someone told me to stop smiling quite so much. A guy, Richard Barnes, his name was, who was an announcer with the old Anglia TV, and I think he did one or two of the other stations. He was on a show called Tiz Was, which was around in the 80s, and he was sort of the straight man on that on occasions, and he was really experienced. And I remember being on doing the training to be an announcer. So we were on camera, and I was obviously, someone had said, it's all eyes and teeth, all eyes and teeth. So someone had told me that. So I don't know, I was all kind of like this, chatting away to camera, thinking, that's it, people will love me for that. And he said, he very politely, very gently pulled me aside and said, when I was training at Anglia TV in Norwich, he said, someone complained to the press office and said, that announcer is just simpering away with that kind of gooey, treacly smile, stop him doing it. And he said it really hit home. He said, so be careful how you smile. It's got to be genuine. You can't just force it on TV because it picks up everything. So that was pretty good advice for me anyway, because I thought I'm going in the wrong direction here.
Right.
So then I was probably miserable on air. I don't know after that, but I thought, he's right. You can't just smile.
It's got to be like
time. It's got to come from the heart. Yeah.
Who or what might have stopped you from becoming your full potential or from realizing your full potential?
Well, it's going to be me, isn't it? It's got to be. I don't think anyone's ever put anything in front of me that I know about, apart from, I don't know whether I can mention his name, but we were at school together. But I remember we were doing a road run. The only thing I sort of could do moderately well was sort of road running. I didn't like the cross country, but we used to do a road run, bit like jogging really. And I was actually out in front, and I remember I thought, I'm going to win this, and I went through the route took us back through the staff car park at the school. And I remember this guy took a shortcut in front of me, which he shouldn't have done. He sort of went over the bank because you had to stick to the road because it was a road run. And he did that. And I thought, that's outrageous. But I didn't have the guts to say to him, you robbed me of that first position. The one thing I possibly could do in sport, I managed to, you cheated. And I still remember that to this day. So he stopped me reaching my potential of being a long-distance road runner. That's why I gave it all up.
Had I got that result, I would be, running marathons.
I would, but I can't think of anyone who's, not knowingly, who's ever tried to stop me doing anything. Probably apart from me and just the fear of failure, the usual fear of failure. Sometimes I think it's the fear of success as well, isn't it? You think, what would I do if I did? If I was on network TV or whatever.
Then what will I have to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can be as big a break as big a block as actually someone putting a block in front of you. It's kind of your own thing. So probably me actually at the end of the day.
And were there any moments of fear that stopped you from doing things that in hindsight you would have liked to have done?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the fear is always there so much that I wouldn't have done it. So I would have thought, no, I don't want to do that. I mean, I'd love to be a better swimmer, for example, but I like to have my feet on the ground. On the ground. Yeah. And so I only stay in the shallow end. And I'd like to, that's a real fear. And that fear goes back to my childhood. It's not like something that, has just come along in later years. I remember my dad taking me to Victoria Baths in Nottingham, which were the old presumably Victorian baths. I think they've been demolished now. But I just remember the noise and the smell of the chlorine, but I remember the noise, and it seemed huge, and it was like in a hangar. So it wasn't like a modern swimming pool. And not getting in, and my dad saying, get in, and I just refused to get into. It's in the early days of learning to swim. So, that's a real fear. And then fear of water, I've still got that, or fear of, not being able to put my feet on the ground, even in a swimming hotel. I'm a bit the same, really. And my dad I think he was frustrated at the end of the day. And not that he was a good swimmer particularly, but he could swim. And he didn't mind the deep end, and he'd dive underwater and things. Or not dive, but he'd sort of go underwater, which I wouldn't do. So that, to some extent, was a big thing. And that was a big fear that I still have, really.
Any advice for people 10 years younger than you about the next 10 years?
So 50-year-olds. Well, if you're like me at 50, that's the worst, not the worst time, but it was the time I suddenly felt I'd gone from being a young person. Even if you're 49, I think you still think of yourself as a sort of youngish person, to suddenly being middle-aged. And that was... And it's stupid. It's just a number. Of course, it's just a number. There are 40-year-olds who are older than 60-year-olds, aren't there? So in their outlook and everything. So I would say, don't worry about the age too much. It gets better, and I think you might get happier as you go along. Not that I was particularly unhappy, but I think don't worry too much about that 50.
Yeah.
And, as the years go on, it's fine, and what can they do to you, really? Yeah. Not very much. Well, they can do a lot, actually, but don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Gary Terzza, thank you so much for coming on the programme.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. If you enjoyed this exploration into Gary's unlived life, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel for a new episode every Wednesday. Did you gain something from this episode? Let me know in the comments section. I hope you enjoyed watching.